let's talk about every single meta that we have ever had. And I guess my credentials is I've made top cut in at least a tournament in every single meta I've been playing since the beginning. Now that Eevee is done, now's the time, right? Eevee Grove is done. I will put Eevee Grove at A. Let's just start here. Eevee Grove is, I think, a very valid A tier meta. I think that it is the most balanced a meta has been. If we look at I have a million tabs open. Sorry about that if you get tilted at tabs. If you look at this, the final Ursi Day of this format, and none of the top decks have a 55% win rate, because it's like every deck is really balanced. It can feel very matchup roulette-y. And I think that is the only issue, right? I see that Tapu Koko Arceus players are kicking butt. This meta feels very, very... Like, I think Sylveon Slop was just too strong. Sylveon Slop was just too strong. Charizard Sylveon only really being countered by Oricorio, and the fact that ranked was streak-based made it to where it did feel very Luxacky. A lot of the streaks, especially a lot of the deeper streaks towards the end. I think that at the beginning of the format, it was great, and then the format really never updated. I think it's a solid A tier format. Before it was extremely hot. So yeah, I think that this is just a solid A tier format. Lots of viable decks, I would say A, but because of Sylveon, I think Sylveon's good for the game. I want to point out, I do think Sylveon's good for the game, because I think that like we want more cards like Sylveon. And we're going to get more cards like Sylveon. The problem is that Sylveon just draws the whole ass deck and there's not enough counterplay to deal with Sylveon yet. So, A tier. I think Sylveon's good for the game. I wanted the game to be faster. The game needs to be faster in a way that we can increase prize points. Chat, is this his YouTube voice? Figure out soon. A meta that I've absolutely hated was Triumphant Light. I think, and I kind of said this right now, I think that Triumphant Light is the closest we've ever had to a tier 0 format. This is the format that happened before Trending Revelry. And so you guys, a lot of people didn't play this meta because a lot of you guys didn't play in tournaments. But tournaments were absolutely the worst that they've ever been. And I think though it illustrates my point like really good, is when you look at the win rates of Dialga Arceus versus every deck that wasn't Rampardo Lucario. There was no Arceus slop. Dialga Arceus was just better than every deck. Its matchups were insane. And like it was just destroying every deck that didn't play fighting. Every deck that didn't play fighting was absolutely getting slopped. And then if you played Rampardo Lucario, and you kind of look at Rampardo Lucario's matchups, it was getting slopped by everything else that wasn't Arceus. This was actually the worst format ever. It was so unfun. The thing that like made Shining Revelry, and we'll talk about that, a better format, was the fact that there were things that rose up, and that was like cool. There were things that rose up. Articuno was so good. If Articuno is good in a format, you know it's not a good format. I'm sorry. And Articuno EX wasn't even that good. It would just farm the fighting decks. Like this is the problem. Every deck farmed the fighting decks, and then those decks got farmed by Dialga. This is the closest we've had to a tier 0 format in Pokemon Pocket. And so that is a dog format. Mythical Island. Let's talk about Mythical Island. Mythical Island was like the introduction of Celebi, and it ended in a bad way. But I think that even with its endpoint, it was still slightly better, right? Like I think that we got Mewtwo EX as the top tier deck for a long time, and then Gyarados came out with the Rocky Helmet stuff, and then finally Celebi. So this meta actually had development. Right, it had development. It wasn't dominated by one deck, but towards the end, it was dominated by Celebi. Celebi wins the last 2 Ursi Days of this set, and it was kind of dog. I'm not gonna lie, because Mewtwo rose so high, it beat Pikachu, right, and then it beat Charizard because of Mew. Greninja Marshadow was very fun. I think that this is like it's between C and D. Depending on how I feel about other formats, I'll drop this to dog. I think a perfectly B tier format is Genetic Apex. I think that I think people look at this with rose-tinted glasses way too much. They're like, oh, there's so much creativity. Are capping. You guys are lying. There was 4 decks. 4 decks that were actually good. Every other deck was bad. And the 4 decks were Pikachu, Charizard, Mewtwo, and Dragonite. Hell no. And Water. Those were the only 4 decks. Water, Pika, Mewtwo, and Zard. And all the decks played themselves. That's my issue with this format. Every single deck played themselves. Pikachu had some skill expression. Arcanine became part of Charizard, so Charizard Arcanine towards the end was cool. But all the decks honestly played themselves. I think Genetic Apex was underexplored because there wasn't much of a comp scene. Do you want me to tell you why that's false? Is that when we look at the comp scene, in fact, the comp scene was bigger back then for tournaments than anything, right? If I look at a Ursi Day back then, they were 1,500 players, 1,600 players, 1,300 players. That is just wrong. There was a competitive scene. I told you I was a part of the competitive scene. Pikachu was the most fun deck. Ranked through in tourneys, no more still Japanese players. Even the non-cash tournaments had tournament people, right? There was the tournament the scene was even huge. My issue with the format was just that it was pretty bare bones, but it wasn't egregious, right? I think that everything was pretty balanced. Pikachu was the best deck. Mewtwo was right behind it and still really freaking strong. And then like Articuno and Charizard held their own, but that was it. There was no other really good deck. All the other decks kind of sucked. But with that dichotomy, it was still fun. Any other deck that you're kind of like dinking Blaine was good for like a week, and then people realized, why am I playing Blaine when I can just play freaking Charizard? So like, that was cool. I love Starmie a lot. So yeah, I think that this is like a solid B tier format. There was nothing bad. Yeah, I said Water. Was Gyarados Greninja bad? Gyarados Greninja was never really a deck, so yeah. Like, Starmie Greninja was better, Articuno Greninja was better. Gyarados? Hell no. Gyarados Greninja was not a deck until Mythical Islands, which then, and that's Gyarados EX, which it was a tier 1 deck. Yeah, there was so many, I think the one thing I'll talk about, let me go. I think the coolest thing about this format was Pikachu. There were 3 different Pikachu decks, all with really cool and like varied forms. My favorite was always Pikachu Raichu, but there were so many cool ways to run Pikachu. I think he did mean MI, but I wasn't talking about MI. So like I thought that they were assuming Gyarados. I used Venusaur in Apex. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So this is my current thoughts. I think that Spacetime Smackdown comes up next. Spacetime Smackdown had the potential. I think Spacetime Smackdown introduced Cyrus, which killed Pikachu. Which is already, I'm pissed off about that. It killed Pikachu and made Pachirisu a deck. And Eggy dominated. Eggy dominated because Darkrai was so good. It was a very varied format, but this was the peak of Celebi dominance. Celebi was the #1 most used deck. And Celebi mirrors were awful. Darkrai Zone was such a fun deck, though. I think Darkrai Zone was like the first deck that had like a lot of different like decision paths and like how you can switch through. And it was like the first multi-energy deck because it was running Lightning from Mag, but it was running Darkrai, right? First quote-unquote multi-energy deck. I think that it deserves credit from there. I will say between Spacetime Smackdown and Mythical Islands, one of these are dog. But I don't think it was Spacetime Smackdown. I think Spacetime Smackdown would have been a great format if Celebi wasn't so strong. Because we had Darkrai Gren. Darkrai Gren was so sick. Darkrai Zone was sick. Fighting Zone was also really cool. But Celebi was just too strong. So Mythical Islands is dog water. Because I think that the decks that were meta, Mewtwo got way too strong, and then Gyarados was too good. Palkia 18 Trainers was cute. I still can't believe Calcio 18 Trainers is winning a tournament, yeah. Did this format have Scarm Zone? Yes, this format had Scarm Zone. Spacetime Smackdown was the first format with Scarm Zone. Here's the issue, chat, I'm realizing. is by having Eevee Grove in A tier. In having Eevee Grove in A tier, I don't know what is peak for me. Maybe I'm jaded and there hasn't been a peak format in Pocket. But let's continue. Shining Revelry. I think Shining Revelry was a really good format. I think Shining Revelry was a really good format. It was a really balanced, skill-intensive format. This is Dark Tina before Guzma. I think Dark Tina before Guzma was very skill-intensive. I think that the issue with Shining Revelry, there was so many good decks. The problem is that every time a deck came to beat Darkrai, Darkrai answered it. Meowscarada became a thing. People started running double hand rip. Gyarados was being a real thing. People started running TRGs, right? Charizard, people started TRGing them, right? Other things that were kind of annoying in this meta was like Mutina got phased out because Dark Tina players got way better at the mirror. So this meta was a good one because it was still very skill intensive. There was a lot of good decks. But Dark Tina was so, like, towards the end of, like, if you're really trying to climb ranked and you weren't using Dark Tina, you were trolling. And that's unfortunately my thought. I do think that this is, like, right now, I can see this being the closest to peak. But that's my thoughts. Celestial Guardians. The introduction of Rare Candy and the introduction of Charizard as we know it. I think it's a B-tiered meta. Genuinely, I think that Rare Candy was cool because it opened up so many different decks. But what it did for the game was kind of like, it was all Candy or Dark Tina, right? You're either playing Dark Tina and then being like, wow, I'm getting candied. Let's do a deep dive. Let's do a smaller little dive into this meta so that we can hate on it with. I remember Dark Tina was ranked like number 1. This meta, so here's the thing, right? People remember it for the Rare Candy stuff, right? There's so many different Rare Candy decks, but there was a lot of things that happened. Like towards the end, Giratina Greninja became a deck. Remember, MST won a tournament. Went on Ursi Day. This was a late, like a mid-format adaptation. Was this deck, right? Was MST winning and then Hobover winning with like this. So I think that like people don't remember that Tapu Lele Greninja was like a mid set adaptation. A Meow was also really cool. There's so many good decks. There were so many good decks that I feel like yeah, I think the Rare Candy stuff was like BS, but it wasn't enough BS to make me hate it. The Arceus Crobat, the Arceus deck was cool, right? They had the Exodia. So I think like this was like a fine meta. I do think that Rare Candy opened up a lot of decks, but I think that the Rare Candy was a little bit overbearing still, right? And then I think that Oricorio was a little bit polarizing, but I think Greninja Giratina becoming a deck late was really cool. I think that is my thought. Eevee Grove way too high. I think it's the most balanced format in Pokemon Pocket. So I think it's the most balanced format in Pokemon Pocket, and therefore I cannot put it anywhere else. Extra Dimensional Crisis. This is a deck. This is a doozy. I think Extra Dimensional Crisis was really good. I think Silverly Slop, there was a lot of cool decks from beginning to end. However, Extra Dimensional Crisis didn't have a real answer to Buzzwole. Buzzwole was just the best deck, and to beat it, you were using Charizard, and if you're using Charizard as the deck that beats it, I think so. Here's the issue right now. Okay, I'm gonna put these all in A. I'm just gonna say it. I think that each of these formats have. Oh, I'm choking. Each of these formats have something that make them peak, but they have something that doesn't. I think I think Shining Revelry was very high skill expression. I think that was really cool. However, it was very linear format, right? Eevee Grove, many decks. Lots of good decks. No deck is completely overbearing. I'd argue Charizard's probably pretty overbearing. But like, it has a lot of decks. And it has a lot of, you know, kind of like, there's still a lot of skill expression. Sylveon sped the game up to an insane degree. Extra Dimensional Crisis had meta development the entire way through. Silverly had so many different decks, right? Silverly Zera, Silverly Ori, Silverly Blacephalon, Sylvramp, right? But they all kind of lost to Buzzwole. Buzzwole was just so strong, but Buzzwole wasn't like toxic strong. It was just good. And there were so many. No one could come together on what the best Buzzwole deck was. Right? Everybody had a different 20, and I think that was so freaking cool. The issue with the format, it really isn't. Honestly, was there an issue with ED Crisis compared to Shining Revelry? I preferred the Dark Tina mirror was more fun than the Buzzwole mirror. The Buzzwole mirror was kind of managing health packs, and whoever kind of lost their first mon was kind of like almost screwed. Going second was extremely strong, whereas going first was pretty good. Buzz had Charizard as a counter, but it wasn't really like, if we go back to ED, Buzzwole didn't really have Buzzwole Pharaoh and Buzzwole Sully. They also won everything. Their bad matchup was Solg Shi, but they really didn't have a bad matchup. Zard was annoying, right? So it was Zard and Solg were your bad matchups, but Gwen Ori was the thing at the last week. I don't think the meta was often. Yeah, Jeudy makes S tier for thinking. I think that, these are all formats with something that's really good. Which set will still have an impact? Well, Shining Revelry gave us Charizard. Celestial gave us Rare Candy. Eevee gave us Sylveon. ED gave us archetypes. But I'm going to say ED Crisis might be, and this is an unsure peak, because I think that they're all peak in a way. I think that these, it feels wrong for me to put any of there. There was a Flocky. There was a Sylveon deck every format. There was literally a Sylveon deck every single format. I mean, a Silverly deck every week. It was like the villain of the week. There was a new freaked up Silverly deck every week. And then the last freaked up Silverly deck was Silverly Zard, which was super stupid. I think that this is these are all great formats. I think that these formats are objectively better, and I'm gonna say it, we haven't had a peak format yet. But all three of these combined would be peak. I think we need a deck, a meta that's as diverse as Eevee Grove, with a good mirror match, right? Charizard mirror matches are hell. Sylveon Gwen mirror matches are also not fun. There's skill in that, but it's really determined by turn order. ED Crisis had new villains of the week. So the meta, okay, I figured it out. It's the thingy, right? It's so I need the meta development of ED Crisis. I need the balancedness of Eevee Grove, and I need fun mirror matches like Shining Revelry. That's the three things that we need to make the best format. The issues, let's go down the line, right? Genetic Apex, there were 4 good decks, and there was meta development. There was a lot of meta development. We were still learning the game. Pikachu had so many decks, no one could determine what the best Pikachu deck was. But the game was very play itself, right? Celestial Guardians, Rare Candy freaking was annoying. I'm gonna be honest. Rare Candy it was just oh, you're playing a Soul, right? There was not enough consistency for the Rare Candy deck still, so it just felt like a Rare Candy roulette, and it felt awful to play in. You play Darkrai, and then you're oh wow, here's my opponent. They got a Rare Candy turn 1. Great game. This is what started the red card Mars shit. This is what started the every deck having red card Mars, and it felt like I wasn't playing the game. So that was Celestial Guardian. Every deck packed red card Mars, and it felt miserable. Obviously, the problem still persists in Eevee Grove, but the problem dropped a bit in Extra Dimensional Crisis. So that's kind of cool. Spacetime Smackdown had potential. You had a lot of good decks, but Celebi Eggs was too oppressive. Eggs in general was too oppressive. Mythical Island was like, it's not as bad as Triumphant Light, I'm gonna be honest. So I'm gonna put this here. I think I was too rude. I think that C is for Celebi. C is for Celebi formats. C is for coin flips. C is for coin flips. Dog, Triumphant Light. Closest we've ever had to a tier 0 format. It was so unfun. Going second was way too strong in the deck. The mirror match was unfun. The meta was unfun. So yeah. This is my thought. We haven't had a peak format yet. But if any of these you put in peak, I wouldn't argue. So that's going to be the end of today's YouTube video. Other than that,